Yeah.
Okay. All right. Three, two, one. We are live. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the second podcast hosted by Eagle 3D Streaming, where it is Eagle 3D Streaming real
Okay.
time talk.
All right.
And
Three, just a second. Yep. I had to mute.
we had a we had an audio by our wonderful host and guest today, who is Vassil Pepelyankov. And Vassil, also known as Voz, is the head of business development, America's creative and CGI of eClerks Digital. I've had the pleasure of knowing Voz for over 3 years now, and at this point, I consider him a dear friend. So thank you very much for being a part of our podcast today. Vaz, if I can brag about him a little bit, his experience in the digital industry expands every conceivable industry that I know of: consumer goods, fashion, apparel, automotive, technology, AEC, and probably 10 other things that I haven't listed. He is an ex Chaos Group guy, the people who have made the V-Ray rendering engine. He was a part of that team in that project. He's a lovely individual, but most importantly, he is a pioneer in the digital space. He was one of the first people that ever started doing pixel streaming or remote rendering. He was one of the first ever, and he's had a tremendous impact on where our industry is today. So, without further ado, and with great pleasure, Voss, how are you doing today?
Thank you, Quinton. Thank you for having me. As you know, this is my first podcast that I've done, so I'm a little bit nervous. I'm doing well, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you so much, and thank you for the kind words you said about me. You know, when I think about it, yeah, I've been in the graphic industry slash digital industry for more than 25 years, and it feels like ages, and yet there is so much dynamic going on that I don't know where to start. I feel like every few years we have to rediscover ourselves. So it's an ongoing industry, all evolving, and it's always fun to be a part of.
Yeah, there's always changes, or I feel like the changes come every once in a while. Like GPU rendering was a big change, and now we've got real time rendering and sending real time data. So it's a very fun and interesting point in time right now. And then all the crazy metaverse and NFT stuff. I think there's a lot of good things that we can explore and discuss today with you. So, Vas, if I may, just explain the layout of the show for those who are tuning in for the first time. So, Vaz and I will discuss topics provided by our audience at roughly 4 minutes for every single topic. We will post questions down below in the question field, and then Vaz and I will explore those to see if we can provide some opinions, valuable insight, and pointers towards these important topics. Of course, this show is totally live. Hey, we're real time, right? Real time company. You've got to be real time, and it's more fun. So, if you have any questions during the show, just send them to us, and we will get answers to you, or we'll try to discuss them. So, Vaz, are you ready?
Of course.
Okie dokie. So let's start off with one of the first questions. Um, First question that we have is, what are some good applications of pixel streaming?
I think that's an excellent question because that's usually how I go about any technology or any solutioning is what's the application and what are the benefits for whether it's professionals or whether it's the end consumer. I think the pixel streaming is the next evolution of delivering graphic intensive content, which in most cases is super photorealistic or it just large, a sheer amount of data that needs to be transferred. And we've hit to a point where our devices could be considered more or less just terminals to carry a signal that we consume and interact with. So applications. So you can see how gaming has have a big role in that. I think Google had a platform or still have of providing gaming through streaming. You have also YouTube is a streaming of graphics. It's just the most conventional one we know, which is just plain and simple videos. But I think applications, graphic applications such as configurators, such as virtual tours, and shopping experience, this is an area that is just so much untapped, and we're just scratching the surface of all that. There is a lot of clients that I communicate with and work with that are looking for solutions to replace their traditional brick and mortar experience, which they rely so heavily, especially for the more luxurious brands where you wouldn't usually just buy a 5 or 50,000 piece of accessory or any kind of product based on just a few images. So this is where the real-time experience kicks in, the immersive and the type of interaction with the product. And the only way to deliver it to every single person, regardless of the device they're using, is through pixel streaming. I hope this answers your question.
So, do you think, or how important is photorealism in all this? Why is it important for our clients, our consumers? And if it's important, why do you think it's, having high fidelity imagery is so um, needed, I would say?
Well, so there are a few aspects to look at photorealism. First of all, what's a photorealism? It's basically what our eyes and brain is trained to perceive as photoreal. Sometimes very photoreal CGI looks CGI just because it's very photoreal. It lacks the distortions and imperfections that we perceive in every day. I can name a few of these, but I think photorealism is important just because when you have e-commerce, you are really selling something that you need to present in the most realistic and natural way of the product, so that the customer can do a proper evaluation, can enjoy the product virtually, and most of all, there is no misleading information. But on the other hand, not all industries actually look for realism. Some are solely based on artistic approach, like the new age of the NFTs and all that craze with the avatars. This is something that realism is not really on the table there, because it's more about a fictional representation of products that solely exist in the digital space. So you don't really have a reference point how that digital asset should look like in the real life, simply because it does not exist in real life.
Hmm. So, so that's probably the reason why we're not making everything look like Minecraft, is because you sort of need a digital representation that accurately reflects the physical representation. Because if I'm considering purchasing a pair of shoes, I don't want them to look blocky like Minecraft. Because when I get them delivered, I'm actually wearing them. Then they're going to be. I need to understand what they're going to look like before I purchase them.
Exactly. Exactly. And so you need to make an educated guess whether you want that product or not. And the only thing that will give you clues and visual information is if it's photorealistic. So that's why there is always this balancing act between how much photorealism we want to put in a product, in a digital product, um, and combat all the restrictions and the constraints we have, whether it's purely from real tracing and render engines such as V-Ray, Corona, Arnold, and many more, and how much time, how time intensive that is to produce, versus the real time, which has a completely different issues to tackle with, such as achieving the photorealism, and how does the engine handle that photorealism with the same amount of polygons and triangles and texture resolution and so on.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And so we've got the next question now, and this kind of flows towards what we were just discussing is, so what makes a digital asset, or what is a digital asset, and what makes a good digital asset?
Oh, I think that's a tricky question. What's a good digital asset? First of all, it needs to serve its intent and purpose, whether that is purely utilitarian purpose to provide information and serve as guidance, or it's purely for pleasure and visuals. So, for example, a digital asset could be something that you buy like an upgrade to your gaming character, like an additional accessories. So on one hand, that has features that will enhance your gaming experience, but also has features purely visual to please your preferences or your allegiance if it's some kind of a brand. But if we go to the back end and we just look at the technical side, then I guess a good digital asset needs to first and foremost be optimal to produce, needs to have a way of producing it in a manner that makes sense for the one that produces it. So it's not a one-off that you just did it because you made a commitment, but in retrospective you wouldn't take the job again. Then also it needs to be compatible with the technology that is going to carry it, whether it's a software or a hardware. So I had experience with fantastic assets being produced in whether it's 2D or 3D, which are completely useless to view on an average device simply because they're too heavy. So that's another aspect. So what is the perfect and ideal digital asset? Well, first, I think it needs to be I wouldn't call it easy to produce, but has to make sense to produce it. Then second of all, it needs to serve its purpose, whether it's purely visual or utilitarian somehow.
Hmm. But can't I just, create a, go into software and make a digital asset? Isn't it easy? Or isn't it, I'll just download a car model from Turbo Squid, and, I've got my digital asset that I can use for magazining and copywriting? Or is it a little more involved than that? Um,
Well, I mean, yeah, you can download it, but again, it's very unlikely that that asset that is pre-built is going to be a turnkey solution for you. So definitely you're gonna have to customize it, optimize it, adapt it, and then deploy it to its carrier, whether it's real time slash pixel streaming or just real time or the conventional way of visualizing it. So definitely, I would not say that there is a perfect digital asset that exists. Maybe some artwork, I would say, because art is very subjective, and a lot of people just find them very satisfying to have them the way they are.
mhm, hmm, yeah. Yeah, it's never. I think it's never as easy as it seems. And the more time I spend in this industry, the more appreciation I have for the artistry and craftsmanship that go into making these digital pieces. Um, so next question, and when we're thinking about digital assets in the context of real time, why is real time important for digital assets, and where does real time fall short? Because, real time is kind of new for digital assets. So why do you think it's important, and where do you think it falls short?
So real time solves a lot of shortcomings of the non-real time uh, rendering. Obviously, it's the next evolution, and as you and I have discussed before, it's very likely that at some point the non-real time and real time will just merge into one unified solution
Hmm.
that will most likely just have different settings and features to enable and disable the real time isness
Have have
of
you,
that product.
have you seen the new Maya plugin that goes from Maya to Unreal?
Yes. And so instead of hooking something like Arnold or V-Ray, you'll be hooking something like Unreal, which can behave like Unreal and behave like V-Ray, depending on what you want. That's at least my understanding and why, because these two technology are starting to bridge itself a lot. The conventional render engines are starting to behave more like real-time engines, adding more and more features. And on the other side of the spectrum, um, Unreal and others are starting to add features that gets them closer to the photorealism and the professional application that the other engines are doing. So at some point, I think they will just converge into one single industry. And so all the shortcomings that we're having now with the real-time solutions, I think it's more about adapting decade-old industry, probably decades, plural, into what the real-time engines actually understand and need and work with. Like we've discussed a lot before, one of the main, I wouldn't call them issues, but just things that bother me always is the classical approach relies heavily on mimicking real life behavior of light, materials, shaders, and whatnot, objects, where the real time to achieve the realism, they need to provide a lot of fake workflows, and that is something that a lot of professionals are finding it difficult to, let's say, if they have shot something with a camera and they want to match the lighting, it's not so difficult to take the parameters out of that camera and just feed it to the render engine, or manually, type in, and you'll be able to match the conditions of the lights, the type of the lights, the type of the camera, the movements, pretty much everything. And this is how most of the high-end professional CGI is done nowadays. And this is something that was very much lacking into the real-time engines, which was making very difficult to understand. Okay, what if when I do these kind of light conditions in Unreal, what is the equivalent in real life? I mean, how do I know what I'm doing? Or everything is done just by looking at it, like on eye to eye. And this is slowly going away. I can definitely see a lot of improvements over the last few years in that direction, which is kind of blurring the area of what you can achieve, and just adding those features makes the transition much more smoother for all the professionals.
So, do you think it's going to be for real time? Do you think they will eventually adapt to where their lighting accurately matches physical based lighting or lighting in the real world, or
I,
will we adapt our workflows to work with how lighting works in real time engines?
well, I think that's an interesting question. I know there are directors out there that are trying to stay away from CGI. I don't think we're gonna go away from what the traditional lighting and just environment setup is doing. Although, with all these deep learning um, solutions, you can safely assume that maybe one day we won't need physical actors to do anything. We can just scan their heads and bodies and have everything done in CGI. But I still think it's the render engines that need to adapt, whether it's real time or not, need to adapt to real life conditions,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, we live in the real life, and most of the content that we consume is related to the real life, whether it's products, whether it's fictional movies, settings, cities, places. Um, at the end of the day, it's the actual world that currently we are making a lot of digital content for. It probably is the metaverse is going to be the first challenge to that? That, okay, what if we don't do digital content for the real world, but instead we do digital world for the digital world,
Hmm.
digital assets for the digital world?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be seen in how it's all going to play out. But it makes sense to match physical lighting in the real time world, because especially when you're having like virtual productions or something where you have a mix between digital and real, it would make sense to have a workflow that works for both. Um, but so when we're thinking about real time in the context of enterprise, because a lot of our viewers and a lot of our customers are based, or they're enterprise companies that have digital pipelines, workflows. When they're thinking about streaming digital assets in real time, what should enterprise companies be thinking about? What are the benefits? Why would they want to use this? What are the things they should be considering? You know, when it comes to enterprise in real time and streaming assets, what would you say?
Well, for the enterprise, I think what we there are a few thoughts here that come to mind. So first of all, considering the what the pandemic did to everyone, it's clear that working in office is not a must anymore. I'm not saying it's going to go away, but now companies have the options to choose between these, which just opens the gates for a lot of possibilities. Like, do we need an office? If we need, what kind of office do we need? Do we need to have everyone concentrated in one area? If, let's say, we are our headquarters are in California, does that mean everyone should be working in California? So, having said that, the need for a physical space to gather is no longer something, and it's not just about meetings and discussions. We could have done that years ago through Skypes and whatnot tools. Now it's obviously even more, but I'm talking about visual presentations, virtual hall rooms, collaboration on physical products like engineering, prototyping,
Mm.
like sending assets, and not just sending them in the conventional way of, I just send you a link and just download it and let me know what you think, but more or less collaborating just as we would collaborate in a big chat room. But instead of a big chat room, that's a big virtual room. And this is where the collaboration kicks in to a whole new level of people across the globe, not just in the same time zone or the same city. And again, back to the pandemic, I think that whole pandemic just condensed probably 5 and even more years of evolution into less than 12 months. I mean, everyone was just forced to adapt as soon as possible and just take a leap of faith in the technology that we already knew is there. We just didn't know whether it's the right time to use it. So pixel streaming and real-time content distribution is playing a major role in that, in collaborating, in sharing ideas, in sharing assets, digital assets, and reviewing together with digital assets, interacting with them in real time as a team. So I think that is something that is really, really exciting about to think about the real time.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love what you say, because it is necessity is the mother of invention, and the pandemic accelerated the growth of our industry. I mean, all it took was a little nudge. But so when you're talking about real time, two things that I noticed was, one was collaboration, so it can be used for collaborating when working with enterprise companies, and the other is reviewing. So with reviewing, what is the more traditional or standard way of reviewing, or how do we review now? Are we delivering images and client gives us feedback via email and we send it back, or how is reviewing currently done right now, and how could that change with the real time process?
Yeah. So it's interesting. That brings me to an old memory of our first baby steps into pixel streaming 6 years ago, because that was the question. How do we review assets with the client without the need to produce an asset, upload it, send a link, provide instructions, wait for the client to review, which they may and may not because of um, for various reasons, and then wait for their feedback and so on. And that's the typical process. So that's the first type of asset that you can think of. But there are a few limitations besides time and having to do step by step everything instead of real time. So first, you need to make sure the asset, the digital asset you're sending, is playable or viewable by your client. You can't really send a 3D model to a client that it barely understands what 3D is. So what the solution is, either the client starts to understand what 3D asset is, or you start creating images out of that 3D asset to provide the proper description of the 3D asset. So this is one, and there is a lot of misalignments associated with that. So for example, the images that you've provided to describe the 3D asset may not be sufficient. The client can push back, say, hey, I need more of these, and the colors are off, because a 3D asset is first a model and then a shader on top of it. So there are a few aspects. The lighting could be off. So there is so much going on, and there is so much misunderstanding, misalignment between what you deliver and how the client sees it. Then this evolved into the cloud type of sharing. We have our proprietary solution, but there are wonderful, great tools out there that you have the ability to send something, just upload it, automatically it notifies all the stakeholders to review it. There could be some kind of real-time collaboration where one sees an asset, another one also is seeing it, but only one is able to review it, provide feedback. So it's much more streamlined process, but it's still far from ideal. And to be honest, this is a really good approach when it comes to imagery. But if you're looking to do something more complex, or something that requires 3D models or 3D scenes, that approach really exhausts all the convenience. I mean, it's borderline inconvenience. So that brings me to, how do we share 3D models with our clients, whether it's simple or complex, that we will ensure they will see them exactly as we intended on any given system, whether it's in a boardroom, whether it's on their personal laptops and tablets, at home or at the office. And that's how we started developing pixel streaming on a real-time CPU-based engine 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, kind of a legend then, because no one was doing that 6 years ago, except for you guys that I know of. But we are almost towards the end of our half hour. So before we wrap up, I've got to ask you about this. Everyone's talking about them. What is an NFT and how are they going to be used by our industry?
Well, I don't think I cannot say for sure that even I know what exactly NFT is. It's still an evolving thing. But as far as I know, is NFT is a digital asset, whether it's a doc file, an Excel spreadsheet, a tweet, a JPEG, a 3D model, an animation, a video file, you name it, as
A
long as it's
podcast?
made out of zeros and ones. And as you know, usually the internet is a very good place to duplicate stuff, and it's hard to prove ownership, who was the first. So NFT solves that issue by attaching a blockchain to any digital asset to prove ownership and uniqueness, and hence the name, a non-fungible token. So when you add this NFT type of when you add the blockchain to a typical digital asset, it becomes an NFT. And so you can proudly consider yourself an owner of something unique or something of a limited quantities. So let's say you have a famous painting like Mona Lisa. Obviously, you can make a million copies of it, some prints, some you can actually hire someone to brush it so that you can have the same texture to the finger feeling. But we all know there is only one Mona Lisa that is priceless. Everything else is having some kind of price tag, depending on the quality, from a very cheap pennies to something more expensive. Where, well, with the NFTs, it's the same. You can have a wonderful photo done by somebody and you can make a million copies of it, but you only have one that is the original because it's an NFT.
Yeah, it's like a verification of authenticity.
Yeah, and so now it's a thing to when you purchase something like a luxury purse or a jacket or sneakers, you can actually have them physically and digitally to prove ownership. And you can wear them digitally. I'm not sure how you wear something digitally, but I guess it's a thing. And probably in the metaverse, it's gonna be even a bigger thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's and it's crazy because it's just happening in the last 3 months, or it's been building maybe longer than that, but definitely accelerating in the last 3 months. Boz, we are up on the half hour. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or add to the
No, I'm just
audience?
I'm very very excited, and I love that. It's great opportunity to share my experience. I would love for other hosts to share their experience, so we can all learn from each other. Thank you
Cool.
so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for being on our podcast. This is Eagle 3D Streaming Real Time Talk. I am Quentin Anderson, the CEO and co founder of Eagle 3D Streaming. And we will continue to do these podcasts at least once a month, maybe more than that. Please check out LinkedIn if you'd like to have a follow up question or if you need to get a hold of us. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and we will see you next episode. And Voss, thank you so much for being here.